Silence is safer. Speaking up comes at a cost. This is the Audacity Tapes, where women have chosen courage across cultures, continents, and systems of power. I'm Robin Jorgensen. Welcome to the conversation. Welcome back to the Audacity Tapes, everyone. Today I have two extraordinary guests with me. My first guest is Karima Bennoune. She is a professor and internationally recognized human rights lawyer and the Louis M. Sims Professor of Law at the University of Michigan Law School. A former United Nations Special Rapporteur in the field of cultural rights, she is one of the leading legal voices advancing the recognition of gender apartheid and chaired the drafting group behind the declaration that we'll be discussing today. Zarqa Yaftali is a women's rights defender in Afghanistan, founder and executive director of the Women and Children Research and Advocacy Network, and a 2026 Zayed Award for Human Fraternity honoree. As a teenager under the first Taliban regime, she attended the underground school her mother created after girls were banned from classrooms. Today, from exile, she continues to advocate for the rights, education, and freedom of Afghan women and girls. Together, they are among the leaders behind the newly launched International Declaration on Gender Apartheid and its destructive consequences. Backed by more than 50 leading human rights and international law experts. They join me as we mark 5 years since the Taliban's return to power in Afghanistan. Karima, Zarqa, welcome to the Audacity Tapes.
Wonderful to be here.
Thank you for having us.
My pleasure. Zarqa, I want to start with you. You were just 13 when the Taliban first took power and girls were banned from school. Your mom, who had been a principal, decided, well, I'm going to fix that, and she created an underground school. Nearly 30 years later, there's another generation of Afghan girls growing up under this Taliban rule. When you look at girls in Afghanistan today, how much of that 13-year-old girl do you see in them?
Thank you so much, Rabin. First of all, as we are going to very close to the fifth anniversary of Taliban take over or the control of Afghanistan, as we all know, this is very sad, horrible, and also painful for all of us. This is the date that Afghanistan women deprived from all of their basic rights, and it's about 5 years that women and girls in Afghanistan, they are in an open prison in the country, and they don't have access to none of their basic rights. The right that there isn't any obstacle in the Islamic values, Islamic Sharia, and not in the international convention. According to your question, as you said, during 1996 until 2001, and the first period of Taliban rule in Afghanistan, and that time I was a teenager girl. I was 13 years old, and I experienced the same experience and the same pain that right now millions of girls are experiencing in Afghanistan. On that time, I didn't have the right to education, and we, and like me, millions of girls, they were denied from the right to education and also other basic rights. And the current generation in Afghanistan, the new generation in Afghanistan, the young generation in Afghanistan, unfortunately, they are experiencing the same situation, the same pain that we that we had about 30 years ago. And that time, as you mentioned, my mother, she was principal of a school, and she established an underground school for girls in our home. And I was one of the students. I was one of the ones that I studied with my mother, and had the chance that my mother provide the opportunity of underground education for me, and also for hundreds of other girls that they were close to our area. So right now I am seeing the same reality the new generation in Afghanistan. But there is some difference as well in this current situation. 13 years ago when we were students of school, on that time there wasn't too much accessibility of accessing to internet. Right now, there are myself and also other women activists. We are trying to provide the opportunity of online education and underground education for girls in the country. For example, myself, I established an online school in Afghanistan, Kabul Online School, and we are providing online education for girls from grade 7 to grade 12, because I faced and I had the experience that the pen. Right now I am in a position that I can do something for girls in Afghanistan, and I didn't allow that the new generation, the young women and girls in Afghanistan, they experience the same situation and the same pain that we did uh, 30 years ago. And inside of this, right now I am trying to provide the opportunity of a scholarship and fellowship for young women and young girls that were inside of Afghanistan and they denied from the right to education. And like me, there is hundreds of women activists that they are in the different countries right now in Afghanistan around the globe, and they are trying to support Afghanistan women. They are trying to provide opportunity of education, online work, and also other resources for those 16 million girls and women that right now in Afghanistan, and unfortunately they denied from all of their basic rights.
Yeah. Whew. When we had Dr. Seema Samar on the podcast a couple of months ago, I've lost track of how many edicts the Taliban have actually put out at this point. But when she was on the podcast, they had just put out the edict that a woman's voice was no longer allowed in public.
Yeah. Unfortunately, during the past 5 years, Taliban leadership, they announced about 260 edicts. And unfortunately, from this 260 edicts, 167 is targeting the rights of women and girls in Afghanistan. So it is very horrible when more than half of the edicts that they announced during the past 5 years, and these are targeting the rights of women and girls in Afghanistan. It is very horrible. They denied women and girls in Afghanistan from the right to education, from the right to work, political participation. The women don't have the right to go to the gym, go to the park, go to the restaurants. And even they cannot use the public transport if there isn't a mahram, a male guardian with them in the house. Sometimes if they are sick, they cannot go to the doctor and they should wait in the home, at their home, once until the time that one of the male member of the family coming, and then they can go together. And instead of this, they announced another edict, and in this edict they mentioned that the voice hearing the voice of a woman is also sin, and they denied the woman from sharing or hearing their voices in anywhere. So right now, as I mentioned before, Afghanistan is an open prison for all of the people of Afghanistan, especially for women and girls in the country.
Yeah. Karima, I want to turn over to you for a moment. Your father was a very outspoken critic of fundamentalism in Algeria during an incredibly violent period in that country's history. And he continued speaking out even after receiving death threats. And you've said that his experience deeply influenced your own work. What did watching your father refuse to be silenced teach you about what we owe the world when we witness something we know is wrong?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having us on the podcast. And I'm so moved to hear what Zarqa has just said, the situation she has described. And this brings me back to your question, how I ended up doing this work with and in support of the leadership of Afghan women. And it is very personal for me. So my family on my father's side is from Algeria in North Africa. My father was actually a veteran of the War of Independence against France. He was a prisoner of war for 4.5 years. He was repeatedly tortured. He survived that experience, though many others, of course, did not. He went on to become a professor at the University of Algiers, where I in part grew up. And in the 1990s, there was a rise of extremism and a number of armed fundamentalist groups that fought against the Algerian state and tried to take power, basically to impose a gender apartheid system and a fundamentalist state, amongst other things. And the direct connection here is that some of the worst jihadist fighters in Algeria in the 90s had gone and fought in Afghanistan and been part of brutalizing Afghans, and then came home with that sort of battle experience and used it against other Algerians. And my father, like so many other Algerian intellectuals, women's rights activists, trade unionists, journalists, spoke out against those extremists. And like so many of them, then was threatened with death, repeated death threats at our home till he finally I was by then living and working outside of Algeria, but he had to leave his apartment. But he stayed in Algeria and he kept writing and speaking out against the extremists, signing his name. And so many other Algerians did as well. And that symbol really stayed with me, that you have an obligation, as long as you can, to use whatever platform you have to speak out against oppression and extremism and for substantive democracy, dignity, and rights. And one of the things that really stays with me, and I think it's relevant to the situation of Afghanistan today, is how painful it was for those Algerian Democrats, small d Democrats, as they called themselves in the 90s, that they received so little support from the international community. The international community did not understand the threat of jihadism. This is the pre-9/11 era. And so it was just, people in North Africa dying. It was not being taken seriously. And if people knew something about Algeria, they knew about the terrorists blowing things up, but they did not know about the peaceful Algerian activists who would go to the sites of the bomb craters and fill them with flowers. And so for me, it's really important to offer whatever solidarity and support we can to Afghans like Zarqa, people from Afghanistan who are so bravely now standing up to the Taliban, like my father and his colleagues, refusing to be silent and continuing to work for dignity and rights.
Ooh, thank you for sharing that history. That's incredibly powerful. Zarqa, as we mentioned earlier, this week marks the 5th-year anniversary of the Taliban resuming power in Afghanistan. What do you think the rest of the world has stopped seeing or stopped willing to look at?
Thank you, Rabin. As you mentioned, this week marks 5 years since Taliban came back to power in Afghanistan. And this past 5 years was full of pain, darkness, and also loss of hoping for Afghanistan women and girls in the country. As I mentioned before, today Afghanistan is like an open prison. Women are there, they are alive, but they can't go out, they can't even breathe the fresh weather, and there isn't any hope for them to for their futures. I am in close contact with young women and also with the new generation in Afghanistan. Unfortunately, when you are talking with these teenager girls, they don't have any hope for their life, and they have lost their hope because they are very talented. They had the dream of becoming doctors, engineers, lawyers, diplomats, activists, journalists, but right now there is nothing for them, and they have lost of all of their dreams and also all of their hopes for for their future. So this is what Afghanistan like today for the for women and to be honest, for all people who are inside of Afghanistan, this is like a prison, open prison for them. But unfortunately, inside of this, because with lots of the problems, difficulties, and horrible situation that right now women in Afghanistan are facing, the international community, as we all know, they don't have any attention to the situation of women in Afghanistan. And the current situation in Afghanistan is this is there was several problems, but one of the problem is the irresponsibility of international community as well toward their commitment and to all of their commitment toward women peace security, their commitment to the SIDA, and also their commitment to the women around the world. But the very concernable issue for us in current situation is it is a silence of international community. It is 5 years that women who are inside of Afghanistan and also women who are outside of Afghanistan, we are all the time we are raising our voice. We are sharing the reality of ground, and which is in Afghanistan with the international community, with the globe leaders. But they don't want to have any attention, and because because Afghanistan is maybe Afghanistan is not a priority for them. So this is why that they leave alone Afghanistan women, and right now this is the poor women of Afghanistan that they are taking the price of this irresponsibility of international community, and also the previous government leaders' fault, granted the government that that they did, and they brought this situation for women of Afghanistan, and the current situation came to Afghanistan in the price of Afghanistan women rights achievement, and also the hard work that we had gained during the past 20 years with lots of sacrifice in the country.
Yeah. Karima, let's dive into the language around this a little bit. We've used so many words to describe what's happening to Afghan women and girls: discrimination, persecution, oppression, human rights violations. You've argued that we need another one: apartheid. Where does the concept of gender apartheid come from? And what does naming this as gender apartheid allow us to understand and potentially do?
So thanks for that question. So the term gender apartheid was first used by women from Muslim majority countries who were standing up to and resisting fundamentalist groups in their countries who either had taken over, as in the case of Iran, and later in Afghanistan, and so in Iran earlier than in Afghanistan in the 90s, or as in the case of North Africa in the early 90s, as I already mentioned, those fundamentalist groups were non-governmental groups trying to take power. And I have heard from Iranian women, they used the term gender apartheid as early as the 80s to describe the kinds of really draconian and systematic restrictions imposed on them. I know that North African women did this in the 90s, and that Afghan women played a very important role. They were the first to call the Taliban's form of rule gender apartheid back in the 90s. And for example, Dr. Seema Samar, who was on your podcast, who is one of the signatories to the declaration, and we're so honored, was using this term in the 1990s. So very important to understand where it comes from. It's really a way of describing particular fundamentalist projects that aim at the systematic oppression and discrimination against women. It's interesting, it's been now used in a range of contexts. Saudi women in the driving protests, women from Yemen, certainly women in Iran and the ongoing human rights struggle in that country today. And interestingly, some Israeli feminists who who are also critics of their government's policies in Gaza, but are working on the situation of gender equality inside Israel, dealing with the rise of the ultra-Orthodox movements and the far-right government, have started using the term gender apartheid to describe the sort of gender policies of that state. So we've seen the term used in a number of different contexts by frontline women human rights defenders. So I was a UN special rapporteur when Afghanistan fell to the Taliban again in 2021. And one of the things that I was so frustrated by as a special rapporteur, as I was working along with so many Afghans and other people around the world, trying to facilitate evacuations for those who are at risk, I was so frustrated by the way in which governments that were deeply implicated in creating the situation in Afghanistan would suggest that we go to civil society or we go to other groups to help. And what I wanted to find was a concept that not only talked about the politics of and the policies of the Taliban, but the responsibility of the international community in the way in which it responded. And so as I moved back into being a full-time academic and started writing, I decided to write something about gender apartheid, very consciously picking up this concept that we inherited from courageous women human rights defenders in the past, and deciding that what we needed to do was really sort of theorize the architecture, the international legal architecture to support this concept. And so it is about describing kinds of institutionalized, systematic discrimination. So for the Taliban, discrimination against women is the form of government. It is core to their philosophy. And that has huge implications for how you go about making change in Afghanistan, because it means, as in the case of apartheid in southern Africa, that sustained, concerted, principled international pressure is absolutely essential to making change. So in 2022, I published an article called The International Obligation to Counter Gender Apartheid in Afghanistan in the Columbia Human Rights Law Review, making this legal argument. And I did this very much in partnership with Afghan women human rights defenders. I did interviews, and I was so grateful because that was such a difficult year for so many of these women. Either they were in hiding inside the country or they had just been forced into exile. And I was really lucky that actually that's how I first met Zarqa, because I had the honor of interviewing her when she was still inside Afghanistan after the Taliban takeover, still advocating bravely for girls' education. And I was so struck that even in those early months of the second Taliban regime, Afghan women were viewing what was happening in their country already as gender apartheid, and it has gotten even worse since then. So if we want to think about a legal definition, I very much support the definition that involves simply adding the term gender to the definition of apartheid that we already have from the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court. And this is the definition that so many colleagues, Afghan colleagues and international colleagues, are pushing for codification of in the Crimes Against Humanity Convention. And this is basically understanding gender apartheid as inhumane acts committed in the context of an institutionalized regime of systematic oppression and domination by one gender group over any other gender group or groups, and this is very important, committed with the intention of maintaining that regime. And this is a very distinct crime. It is very different than other concepts like persecution, even systematic discrimination, even though it overlaps with them. But important to say, we hope to see gender apartheid codified as a crime, but it's also a human rights concept. And this was true of apartheid in Southern Africa as well. And it is a human rights concept that is about recognizing and calling out the specific harm of the Taliban that involves, as Zarqa so eloquently described, the systematic erasure of women from public life in a country But it is also a framework that we use to call out the international community in how it responds. And it's clear if you look back to the jurisprudence on apartheid in Southern Africa, the International Court of Justice made it absolutely crystal clear that all states have an obligation to take effective action to end apartheid, which is an illegal situation. And just the last thing to mention, one thing that has been so moving has been to see the way in which people from Southern Africa, including South Africa, who survived apartheid in their own country, who opposed that form of apartheid, have been supporting Afghan women and other affected women on this issue. And so we are so proud to have South African signatories to the declaration, including Penny Andrews, who was long writing about gender apartheid. Penny Andrews, the first Black woman to be the dean of a law school in South Africa. And I think she really understands how critical it was to have partnership between the frontline human rights defenders in South Africa, those who from South Africa who had been pushed into exile, and the international partners using the international legal framework and the UN system. And that's what we want to replicate here with regard to gender apartheid. And I will end by remembering the important words of Graça Machel, prominent Southern African human rights advocate in her own right, former First Lady of South Africa, who said very clearly, looking at the Taliban, this is gender apartheid. I support this understanding of what the Taliban are doing. And I want to see the international community have as effective of a response to gender apartheid in Afghanistan as they did to apartheid in South Africa. So taken together, all of this, I think, is the added value of gender apartheid, which is not a panacea. It's one of the tools that we can use, and especially to galvanize political will, because making the change here, above all else, is going to require political will on the parts of governments in every region of the world.
Yeah. What do you think is when I was at the Commission on the Status of Women at the UN in March, I attended a session specifically around codifying this into the Crimes Against Humanity Convention. And, one of the things that came up, we also do work in East Africa and Rwanda. It took them years, the international community, to even identify the genocide against the Tutsi as genocide. What is it about the international community that is they're so entrenched, where it's so difficult to name what is so obvious? Why is that?
That's a great question. I actually also really want to hear what Zarqa thinks about that, if she'd like to answer that. So I'll try to be brief. I mean, I think there are a number of things. One is we're seeing a global backlash against women's rights everywhere,
100%.
including in the United States. And that has just deprioritized this issue at the international level in really tragic ways. And one of the things we say in the declaration is actually the failure to respond effectively to gender apartheid, including in Afghanistan, is a grave threat to women on the front lines, but it also undermines women's rights everywhere. So I think that's one issue. And this is part of the broader sort of movement to really strengthen women's rights at this time that we need around the world. And I think another terrible mistake is, again, Zarqa alluded to this, deprioritizing Afghanistan because there are other crises in the world. We have to be able to care about more than one human catastrophe at the same time. And look, my family learned this the hard way in Algeria. What happens in a particular country's situation doesn't stay there. If gender apartheid is allowed to continue in Afghanistan, if the current situation is normalized by the international community, the risk to people and to rights is most grave in Afghanistan, but also, really will spread across the region and potentially even around the world.
Yeah. Sarka, is there anything you want to add? Why is it so hard for the international community to actually name what seems so obvious?
As Karima mentioned, I want to add that right now, for the international community, the issue and also the story of Afghanistan women is not a priority for them. And as we all know, the international community, different government, different states, they have their uh, own policy and they have their own external policy. This is why that they want to go according to their policy, and unfortunately in their own policy there isn't any place for Afghanistan women to support them. And instead of this, unfortunately, those countries that they have feminist foreign policies, even they don't have any attention to the situation of women in Afghanistan, and they didn't support Afghanistan women and Afghanistan women's rights movement that worked during the past 5 years with lots of difficulties and struggles. They are not going to support them and stay strong with them, at least stay strongly with them to support them. So this is why the international community, they didn't want to support Afghanistan women. And instead of this, we are witness that during the past 5 years, UNAMA, UN member states, they had several travel to Afghanistan. They had meetings with the Taliban, and instead of providing the opportunity and platforms for Afghanistan women, they are providing opportunities and platform for the Taliban. And according to their condition, even they are not going to ignore Afghanistan women in some of the international conference. For example, we had Doha 3, and the Doha 3, because of Taliban request, the international community, the UNAMA, the UN bodies, they didn't invite women's rights activists and civil society activists in this event to talk about themselves. Right now, the main victim of current situation is women in Afghanistan. So this is the right of Afghanistan women that they should be in all tables and all discussion which is holding about Afghanistan. And instead of this, as we all know, maybe right now the international community, they don't have much attention to Afghanistan women and also the situation of women in Afghanistan. But instead of this, this is our responsibility. This is our responsibility to hold accountable the international community as well, as we are working to hold accountable the Taliban. So this is our responsibility to hold accountable the international community toward their commitments, toward their policies, and also to their policies and their commitment to the international laws. For example, under CEDAW law, under women's security, peace and security conventions, and also other international conventions.
Yeah. So let's dive into the declaration a little bit. You have both spent 18 months working with Afghan women's rights defenders, international lawyers, human rights experts to develop this international declaration on gender apartheid and its destructive consequences. And you've had more than 50 extraordinary global voices putting their names behind this, including Nobel Peace Prize laureates and leading Afghan and South African human rights advocates. What was missing from the international response that made this declaration necessary? And we may have just addressed it a little bit. And what are you trying to make possible with this declaration? And either of you are welcome to answer that.
Yeah, first of all, I want to say thank you from Karima, because the declaration is the result of her hard work during the past 18 months, and also with a number of other incredible women that they work together for development of this declaration, and also have an endorsement of 50 individuals and international 15 individuals and organization for this declaration. Thank you so much, Karima, for your work. And from my perspective, right now we have a declaration. In the past when during our advocacy with member states and also with other international community, there was a gap of not having a legal document to criminalize gender apartheid as a crime against humanity. Right now, we have this document. Right now, we have this declaration. This declaration will be a advocacy a tool for all of us for our future advocacy regarding codifying of gender apartheid as a crime against humanity. And inside of this, right now, the international community, they cannot point to us that you are saying that gender apartheid should be criminalized, but there isn't any specific document that we should go according to that document. But right now we have this document, and there isn't any ways for criticizing and also objection of international community member states. So I am sure that this declaration will be very strong advocacy tools for all of us for our future advocacy, and hopefully through this declaration and also other documents that we have for codifying of gender apartheid, we find the opportunity of codifying gender apartheid as a crime against humanity in Afghanistan.
Karima, anything you want to add to that?
Sure, and thank you so much to Zarqa and all the other people who worked on this process. So, as you've said, the International Declaration on Gender Apartheid and its Destructive Consequences is a new experts declaration. It was formally launched on Thursday, August 13th. It was the result of an 18-month, as you said, process of global consultation with leading experts, both from Afghanistan, from South Africa, and from around the world, including a number of consultations, both virtual and one in person at the University of Michigan Law School. Very grateful to the law school, as well as the partners who co-sponsored that event, like the Afghan Institute for Strategic Studies and the Organization for Policy Research and Development Studies, or DROPS, another Afghan-led organization, and Nazra for Feminist Studies, which is based in Egypt. There was then a joint Afghan international drafting group, which took all of the input and worked on that for a year, from spring of 2025 to spring of 2026. And then other Afghan colleagues, including Zarqa, played such a critical role in the adoption process, coming to the adoption meeting and working on everything since then, the launch and so on. And I'm really thrilled that this has been successful against the odds. It had very low budget project, and it is now available on its own dedicated website, genderapartheiddeclaration.org. Not only that, but it's available in English, Farsi, Pashto, and French, thanks to some volunteer translators, including from the Afghan Institute for Strategic Studies. It has been signed now, I think the latest count today is by 59 experts. And when I say today, I'm speaking a few days before the launch. And these are some of the world's foremost experts in the fields of international law, women's rights, and on the situation in Afghanistan, including Zarqa. And I'm so thrilled. We have 3 Nobel laureates who have signed. We have a range of former and current UN officials and experts. We have 2 former UN Special Rapporteurs on Violence Against Women, for example. We have leading Afghan signatories, including Fawzia Koofi, former Deputy Speaker of the Afghan Parliament, Dr. Sima Samar, Mariam Safi, the head of the organization I mentioned a few moments ago, DROPS. We have leading South African signatories, including 3 former justices of the Constitutional Court of South Africa, Justices Sisi Kampepe, Richard Goldstone, and Albie Sachs. We have the former president of Ireland, Mary Robinson, and the former vice president of Costa Rica, Elizabeth Odio Benito. We have some international law experts from every region of the world. I mean, literally some of the top people in the field. So I think about Georges Abissab from Egypt, who is a former judge ad hoc on the International Court of Justice. There's a wide range of people that you could think about from different regions. Laurence Boisson de Chazourne from Switzerland. We have people from across the Africa region. Hala El-Karib, the director of the Strategic Initiative for Women in the Horn of Africa, all the way across to Senegal, where we have Dr. Fatou Sow, retired professor from the University of Dakar. We have the former chair of the UN Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, African-American expert Gay McDougall, who was a critical advocate against apartheid in Southern Africa. And we are so honored to have every single one of them. And what we're trying to show here is that gender apartheid is a concept which is increasingly accepted in international law, and that everything needs to be done to develop international law and to use international law to support those frontline women human rights defenders in places like Afghanistan. And I should say that this effort builds on the precedent of previous experts' declarations in international law on other issues like economic and social rights, or like economic, social, and cultural rights, or sexual orientation and gender identity. And some of those declarations have really changed international human rights law and the way we interpret it. They've been cited by the UN, they've been cited by governments and national policies, and even by some courts. And this is the kind of thing we hope will happen with this declaration. But just to address before I wrap up, you asked, why do we need the declaration? Well, these are the purposes of the declaration, in addition to what Zarqa mentioned. The first is to promote the codification of gender apartheid in the Crimes Against Humanity Convention. And we have people who have never spoken out on this issue before, very prominent people. I think of the lawyer Juan Mendez, a former UN Special Rapporteur. We have them supporting the call for codification from every region of the world. Number two is to provide Afghan women human rights defenders and other frontline defenders with a tool to use pending codification. Because even in the best case scenario, codification in the Crimes Against Humanity Convention, which we so support, is not going to happen before 2029. And women in Afghanistan can't wait for, many more anniversaries for there to be international action. So we need this tool pending codification and alongside codification, because I think there are some additional issues that the declaration addresses that are very important. We also wanted the declaration to promote the use of forward-looking, gender-inclusive interpretations of existing international law, and to say to governments, you can't wait till 2029 when codification happens. You need to use the framework of gender apartheid now, and you have a strong international legal basis for doing that.
Let's stay with international law for just a moment. It can feel really distant from the woman who is sitting in Afghanistan, who has been told she can't study, she can't work, she can't participate in public life. How does something like the declaration ultimately become leverage for her?
That's a great question. And I love teaching international law because my students always, ask that question. What is this going to mean in the real world? What about implementation? So what I would say is sort of the leverage or the impact of the declaration now actually depends on all of us. As Zarqa said, it's an advocacy tool. So we need women human rights defenders, feminists around the world, or maybe people who don't call themselves feminists but advocate for women's rights, civil society, governments, scholars, jurists, UN bodies, journalists, and literally concerned people everywhere to use this text to advance women's human rights in Afghanistan, to keep this issue on the agenda, because it's like a blip for the anniversary now, and it disappears again. And what we hope is that some of the kinds of things that happened with other experts' declarations, whether it's mentioned in court cases, whether it is mentioned in national policies, that all of that can happen with this declaration in a way that builds support for and leads to change for women on the ground. But that is not a given. That requires now all of us to use this tool. So as long as the process has been to get to the launch, this is not the end. This is really the beginning of our work. But I also wanted to say that it was really important for us to launch this declaration now as a sort of sign of deep solidarity. So not the solidarity of words, but the solidarity of action and engagement. And to say to women in and from Afghanistan who have refused to give up these 5 difficult years that we are going to continue to stand with you. We are committed to do everything we can to use international law to support your efforts and leadership. And we hope that this is going to be a sign of, sort of hopeful, forward-looking commitment. And again, if you look at the South African example, the leadership in the anti-apartheid movement came from the grassroots, from the front line inside South Africa, but also from the South African diaspora. But they then had a global network of sustained support over decades. And we hope that the declaration can be one of the tools in the toolkit of sustaining this kind of model that can really lead to a different Afghanistan. And I think what we're trying to say with this declaration overall is that Afghanistan does not have to be this way. This is what Afghan women have been telling us. Another Afghanistan is truly possible. They haven't given up on it, and we will not give up on supporting them.
Yeah. There is a striking connection between both of your stories. Zarqa, your mother responded to the Taliban by secretly educating girls. Karima, your father refused to stop speaking despite threats against his life. And then both of you went on to devote your own lives to human rights. Zarqa, where does that level of moral conviction come from?
I was born in war and conflict, and I was grown in war and conflict in my country. I was the witness of violation of my rights and also violation of women and girls' rights in my country. And my mother, she was my role model, and she was the one that which was very brave and with lots of problem, difficulties, and security threats. She decided to provide the opportunity of underground school for girls who were denied from the right to education in Afghanistan 30 years ago. So this is why that I decided that I'm going to continue and I will do something for Afghanistan women. This as a one that I experienced the same situation 30 years ago when I had the opportunity to continue my education, when I had the opportunity to graduated from university in Afghanistan and Kabul, and then started my activism for women and girls in Afghanistan after fall of Afghanistan in 2021. And that time I decided that I'm going to continue my struggles and my activism for Afghanistan women, because this was the time that we should do something for Afghanistan women. Right now, when you are working for Afghanistan women, when you are working for girls' education, when you are working to empower women in Afghanistan, it is not very easy. It needs struggles, it needs sacrifice, and already we did. We did lots of struggles and we did lots of sacrifice for women empowerment and also girls' education in Afghanistan. But the one thing, as Karima mentioned, that we will not give up, and we are going to continue our struggles. And I'm sure that one day this is the women of Afghanistan that they will bring change in the country, and the women of Afghanistan, they will lead the country. They will be the future leaders in the country, especially the new generation in Afghanistan, the young women that they are in Afghanistan, and in this current situation they are facing. They are feeling all of the pain and also all of the difficult times that is in Afghanistan.
Yeah. Karima, what makes someone keep choosing moral conviction when there's very real consequences for doing so?
Well, thank you so much for that question. And I just have to sneak in the part of the response to the last question that I forgot, which is about what people can do. And we want to count on your moral conviction too. Please share the declaration. It's at genderdeclaration.org in the 4 languages. Share it with everybody you can think of on social media and beyond. You can, if you speak other languages than those we already have translations in, you could think about translating the declaration. We want to see people develop toolkits for how to use the declaration. You can sponsor an event about the declaration, bringing in Afghan women to talk, who have been involved in the process, to talk about it. So it's really sort of up to all of us. And this brings me back to moral conviction and why you keep doing the work. I would say at the personal level, I became a human rights lawyer many years ago because I grew up knowing about the experience of the Algerian side of my family in the War of Independence, just the brutality of French military repression at that time. And my dream was to work, even in a small way, to keep the same thing from happening to other families like Zarqa's family and many others. And I think making the connection between the personal and the universal is a really important piece of keeping going. But in terms of the work on Afghanistan, which I have to say sometimes is a lot of work and it's challenging, what keeps me going is Zarqa and all of her colleagues, because they absolutely refuse to give up. And they really remind us of the power of relentless commitment to equality and dignity, even in a context of the most extreme kinds of discrimination. They remind us in this time of global backlash that we all have to find ways in our own contexts to use international law to defend women's rights. And I was really struck. There are many events for the anniversary of the Taliban takeover and of Afghan women's resistance to that takeover. I went to one. It will be by the time this airs a week ago, sponsored by 2 organizations, Femina and Rawadari, that featured women poets. And I'm really struck by the words of one of the Afghan women poets named Shafika Dibaj. She wrote, "1,000 times with blows of the axe, they struck me to the ground. 1,000 times I grew again, for I am made of pine." And I have to say, to the inspiring Afghan women human rights defenders in these very difficult times, we have watched you grow back again and again, as difficult as it is, and you give us the strength to keep doing that with all of the axes currently aimed at women's rights, whether in the United States or in Afghanistan or anywhere around the world.
Whew. Thank you for sharing that, both of you. 5 years can be a really long time for people to sustain interest, right? It's long enough for the outrage to fade, the headlines to move on, and even for the unthinkable to begin feeling inevitable. Are we watching the international community normalize the Taliban? And either of you are welcome to answer that.
Yeah, thank you for the question. As you know, 5 years is a long time, and no one can fill the gap which is coming to girls' education in Afghanistan. For example, those girls that their age were 13, right now they are 18. Those that they were 18, right now they are 23. So no one can fill this gap, and no one, to be honest, no can feel the pain as well, the pain that those innocent girls and women are experiencing in Afghanistan. But instead of this normalization of Taliban by the international community is one issue, and also normalizing of the situation from the international community, it is another issue. Right now, we are seeing that the international community, some of the states, some of the governments, they are expecting that the current situation is is not something new in Afghanistan, and this is the people of Afghanistan. They are going to accept. They are accepting this situation because this is some kind of their custom and tradition issue. But the Afghanistan custom and tradition is not this. If we see to the history of the war, and the time that we had incredible woman in our history, and that time there wasn't any woman activist in the eastern country. And the time that Afghanistan women had the right to vote, on that time the right to vote was not accessible for the women in our neighbors in the region, and also maybe in some country around the world. So this is not some kind of tradition issue for Afghanistan women, but this is the policy of the Taliban, that right now they implementing this policy, and they are denying women from all of their fundamental rights, which again I'm emphasizing that it is not an Islamic values, because in Islam there isn't any obstacle regarding to girls and women education and there. But right now, Taliban saying that girls' education is not allowed according to Islam. So this is their own Islam. This is the tradition and custom of the Taliban. This is not the tradition and custom of all people around the world. For example, my mother, she was one of the educated women in her province, and she was very young when she candidate herself as for the member of the parliament. On that time, for example, 50 years ago, she was a candidate for the parliament of Afghanistan. She was very young, and instead of there was other women that they were very capable, and they had political participation and political influence in the situation of Afghanistan and the decision making inside of Afghanistan. So this is what's happening in Afghanistan. This is not normal according to my perspective, and also millions of women and men that they are inside of Afghanistan and also outside of Afghanistan. But also it is the international community that they want to normalize the situation in Afghanistan, and inside of this they want to normalize Taliban as well. For example, when they are inviting Taliban to the different countries, this is some kind of legitimacy to the Taliban, and also some kind of normalizing and whitewashing the Taliban. Because from my perspective, what's happening in Afghanistan and what is doing Taliban in Afghanistan, it is illegal, it is not normal, and also what is doing international community toward legitimizing of Taliban regime in Afghanistan. So this is not some kind of normal behavior that we have seen during the decades around the world.
Yeah. Karima, at what point does engagement cross the line from necessary diplomacy into legitimizing the very regime responsible for this oppression?
This is a very difficult question, and the declaration tries to address this in a range of ways. I think another sort of goal of the declaration is to be a tool to use against the normalization of the Taliban. I think that's a key contribution of the gender apartheid framework overall. So there are a number of key provisions to consider here in the declaration. The first is that according to operative paragraph 6, complicity with or otherwise assisting in the commission of the practice of gender apartheid is prohibited by international law. And we have leading international legal experts from all regions of the world agreeing to that. When you see really sort of participation almost in gender apartheid, that states are willing to go into meetings with the Taliban and not take women with them, to have all of these photo ops with all male photo ops, even leading international organizations, all male photo ops with the Taliban, with only men present, when they are willing, for example, to say, okay, we'll meet with you, but we won't have women's rights on the agenda. That
Which
really
is ludicrous.
begins to cross, absolutely, to cross the line. It's a kind of participation in gender apartheid. Or when the Taliban bans women from working in certain contexts, including international organizations, you know, shouldn't those international organizations react in a very principled way? Imagine in another context if it was an ethnic group that was being prohibited from working, say, for the UN, and how the UN ought to react to that in a principled way. We also say, and I think this is critically important and goes back to your question, in the declaration, operative paragraph 7 says that any engagement with perpetrators of gender apartheid must be subject to human rights scrutiny, including women's human rights scrutiny, and must not be carried out in ways that demonstrate tolerance for abuses. So if you're going to engage with the Taliban, you have to look very carefully at what the impact on human rights, including women's rights, will be of that engagement. You need to talk to Afghan WHRDs like Zarqa and her colleagues and find out how they view that engagement and what the impact will be on them. You know, when the Taliban is invited to international capitals, and sometimes even private planes are sent to get them, or when in the Doha 3 meeting, the UN acquiesces to excluding Afghan women from the core of the meeting and excluding their rights from the meeting, so as to be able to talk to the Taliban. This is a really problematic form of engagement. And I know that there's also an ongoing humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan, which is very serious, and Afghan WHRDs are the first to express their concern and to react to that. And sometimes, unfortunately, that is used as an excuse for why action cannot be taken on gender apartheid, or why there needs to be engagement with the Taliban. And the declaration also responds to this. It makes clear, as we have learned from Afghan WHRDs and the technical experts in the field, that gender apartheid actually gravely exacerbates humanitarian crises. It makes them worse. And that, for example, when women can't work, especially in a country full of war widows, female-headed households, and that gender apartheid has to be ended to enable an adequate humanitarian response. So you can't set the women's rights issue aside while you address the humanitarian issue. They go together. As the UN itself, the UNHCR and the UN Office of the High Commissioner for Refugees more than a decade ago said that protection of human rights and humanitarian action must be mutually reinforcing, not traded off against each other. And that is absolutely the case here in Afghanistan as well. Look at what happened with apartheid South Africa. That government was stigmatized. It was ejected from the UN General Assembly, and instead it was the African National Congress that had observer status in the UN. Now, these are not exact parallels, but it is critically important that the Taliban remain outside of that UN seat, that they are not given a place at the table in international fora, and that any discussion with them absolutely involves advocating for women's rights at its core.
Yeah. Karima, you've spent decades working at the intersection of international law, women's human rights, cultural rights, and fundamentalism. Zarqa, you've now lived through 2 eras of Taliban rule. Zarqa, when you look at Afghanistan, do you see an extreme exception or a warning about something much larger happening to the rights of women around the world?
Yes, before fall of Afghanistan, one things that all the time we shared with international community and also with the international alliance, it was that if situation change for women in Afghanistan, and if women in Afghanistan they have lost their right, so this will be not be just for Afghanistan, and one day it will be go out from the borders of Afghanistan, and it will be cover neighbor countries, region countries, and also the world country. And right now, what's happening in our region, what's happening in our neighbor countries, this is what was our warning to the world before fall of Afghanistan. Right now, we are seeing that there are lots of extremist groups that they become active in the region countries, they become active in the neighbor countries. And one thing that right now they are feeling in Afghanistan. These extremist group, these terrorist group, all of them right now in Afghanistan, and Taliban supporting them and then sending them to other countries. And several times we heard from other countries that some extremist group, they said that we want the Islam which is in Afghanistan. So this is some kind of warning to all the world that the situation will be not just stay in Afghanistan. It will be take all women around the world, and one day the neighbor countries, the region countries, the world countries, they will be face the same situation that women in Afghanistan right now facing. If they take not any practical action right now, I'm sure that tomorrow is their turn. Tomorrow is the turn of their countries, and unfortunately, again, this will be the poor women of other countries that they will pay the price of this kind of normalization and also engagement, and also not realistic action toward fighting these extremist groups like Taliban.
Yeah. Karima, anything you want to add to that?
I think of what our friend Heather Barr wrote. Heather Barr, who has been working on Afghanistan for a long time, works at Human Rights Watch. And she wrote a few years ago that basically the weak international response to gender apartheid in Afghanistan shows women everywhere, how our rights are viewed. And I think that is absolutely true. And the Universal Declaration of Human Rights promises equal rights and dignity to everyone. And everyone, I always used to say when I was a special rapporteur, literally means everyone, not everyone except in that country. And so I think, a chain is only as strong as its weakest link. And the chain of international legal protection for women's rights is gravely undermined by the situation in Afghanistan, by the tolerance of widespread de jure, open, blatant discrimination against women, subjugation of women, and oppression of women. And so, again, really, it's time to use the declaration, to use other tools to take a stand in support of Afghan women, women from Afghanistan, but also in doing that, in support of women's equal rights and dignity everywhere at a time when that is a principle that really needs to be reaffirmed.
For sure. If someone reaches the end of this conversation and refuses to simply feel horrified and then move on, what are you asking them to do with what they now know from this conversation?
Keep the situation of Afghanistan alive in the public's imagination. Keep raising international obligations to act effectively to support women's rights in Afghanistan with your government everywhere, your elected officials everywhere. Invite Afghan women human rights defenders to come and speak in your venues and platforms, publish their writing, listen to what they're saying, because Afghan women human rights defenders were not surprised by anything that happened in the last 5 years. If you were listening to them in 2021, in the lead up to the fall, they told the international community very clearly what would happen if the Taliban came back to power. Governments, including unfortunately some in the US government, said there was a new, improved, moderate Taliban. This construct was a complete lie and a mirage. Afghan women knew. And so maybe above all else, what we have to do here is listen to Afghan women experts about the way forward. But on the smaller level, I would ask you, please, again, to visit genderapartheiddeclaration.org, circulate the declaration, and help us to develop further ways of using it. But just don't forget Afghanistan.
Yeah. Zarqa, what does meaningful solidarity with Afghan women look like right now? We have listeners in 59 countries. What does meaningful solidarity look like for Afghan women?
Meaningful solidarity for Afghanistan women right now is practical action. We want from all international community, from government, that they should come out from very beautiful words, from very beautiful statements about Afghanistan women. They should take practical action and support Afghanistan women with the action. Instead of this, they should raise the voice of Afghanistan women in the different international platforms. They should provide the opportunity for Afghanistan women to be in the different platforms, to share their voices, to share their concerns, and also to share the reality of Afghanistan with the world, what is going in Afghanistan. And instead of this, there is need to share widely about the reality in Afghanistan, because we are thinking that all the world, they are knowing about what is going on in Afghanistan, but it is not true, because this is just governments that they know about what is going on in Afghanistan, but there is need to work with civil society organization, with feminist movement, and share awareness with them about what the reality of Afghanistan, and also what kind of support we are asking from them, what kind of pressure we want from them to put on their governments to support Afghanistan women, and also to be with Afghanistan women. So this is and inside of the support of Afghanistan women through using this declaration, because if they are using this declaration as advocacy tools, and they are working, advocating for codifying of gender apartheid as a crime against humanity. So right now we have this declaration. And again, I'm emphasizing that we are tired of beautiful statements and words. We want just practical actions from international community, and also from the member states and all people around the world.
And I'm so glad Zarqa mentioned codification of gender apartheid, because that's another critical thing that people can do, is to push their governments to support the codification of the prohibition of gender apartheid in the Crimes Against Humanity Convention being negotiated in the UN between now and 2029. Absolutely critical area of action.
Yeah. That is a perfect place to end right there. Karima Zarqa, I cannot thank you enough for this conversation. It's desperately needed. And we will have links to the declaration and your bios and some other links for, like, Zarqa, your organization as well, in the show notes. And we will see everyone back here next time. Take care, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Have a nice day.
If this conversation awakened something in you, pay attention to that. Audacity isn't reserved for a select few. It's a decision made in moments when conviction demands action. If this episode moved you, I invite you to follow the show and be part of amplifying women who are changing the world across cultures, continents, and systems of power. This is the Audacity Tapes. Until next time, choose courage.